There's no question but what I'm speaking to an audience better versed than I am in the scope of contemporary literature in Spanish, and that the single richest vein of that literature comes from Chile. And most of you are painfully aware that one shame of literary culture in the U.S. is the nominal amount of work available to us in English from other languages. Further contributing to the obstacles to the work that may get translated is that it is often more or less discreetly confined to the countries where it is published. A translation in the UK will make it to the US at a slow, costly trickle, and then US readers will balk at the Englishisms, even if, as Joseph Conrad thought, one ought to be English. Alternatively, it may be fair to assume Londoners don't want to read a rowdy American translation. The obstacles do stack up. I need to also say due credit for translators falls far short of the mark. This is changing. It really is changing, title by title, author by translator, press by press. Belatedly, the word arrives. I am here introducing a fine new translation of Purgatorio by Deeny. In fact, I do not know if Zurita will read within or outside the confines of Purgatory, but I know we will all suit up for the journey. At least as early as the 1986 University of California publication of Anti-Paradise, Jack Schmidt's translation, the same year Stephen White's Poets of Chile came out from a small North Carolina press called Unicorn, Raúl Zurita emerged to English readers as the leading voice, the voice, as Stephen White put it, by which new Chilean poetry is measured. At that point, Zurita had only published 2 books, 4 by the time that particular anthology of translations was actually released, while at the time White allowed that Zurita's dominant reputation could be considered a disproportionate highlighting of a poet's obvious talent. Umpteen books later, Zurita's title can only be viewed as an understatement. So with Purgatorio, E-N-R-I, and Song for His Disappeared Love, English language readers, though decades behind, are beginning to catch on. Raúl Zurita must be read. In Chile, poet could be entered on every other birth certificate as future occupation. If we only list Mistral, Huidobro, Neruda, Para, Lin, Zurita, Han, and Vicuña, we are just marking the more translated poets. Uninitiated English readers could probably only name Neruda. It takes more than birthright, endurance, or forbearance to wear the mantle of so many maestras and maestros. It takes real nerve, and it takes an absorption, not just with one's own preoccupations, but with the language, a language, that will serve those concerns. When the most absorbing concern is the fate of one's own land, one's own people, the obligation runs deep, and the language must be up to the reach. As noted in the foreword to the new translation, the work suggests a topo map of the country. The poet bears the scar that runs through it. Instead of speaking for others, Zurita channels their voices. The extraordinary landscape of Chile, now trying to recover from a fresh trauma, is the stuff of which Zurita's poetry is made. The land and the sky are his pages. The body is his book. The book is a landmark. Some years ago, I befriended Beijing poet Xishuan. Among his closest friends, one went mad in exile, one tied himself to the train tracks in Beijing, one went into a coma during the sit-ins in Tiananmen. Xishuan went blank for a long stretch. Asked years after Tiananmen by a Dutch poet why he didn't leave, his first thought was it was natural to stay in China, being Chinese. But he responded with his second thought, I decided to remain with my fate. Reconnecting with his language one word at a time, bird, bicycle, city, fire, peony, in a series of prose poems that commence with literal and naive elaborations on simple nouns which turn towards never mind. This is a segue. Zurita did not, in fact, have the resources to leave his native land after the coup. He was a young husband, father, a student, in other words, poor. but over the long shadow of Chile under Pinochet, perhaps it would also be accurate to say Zurita decided to stay with his fate. And when Zurita travels, which he does a great deal, he carries Chile, not an exile from without, but from within. His poems are armed with Chile's modern history, which bears the scars of its longer history. His suitcase is bulging with the Atacama, the Andean Cordilleras, the plains and the Pacific, and its human bait. He carries the unforgotten, the unforgiven. He carries the language of trauma, a language reconstituted from the shatter zone. He reveals its story to us in capas, in layers. Zurita is the great archaeologist of contemporary Chilean poetry. Hearing him read on a couple of occasions, most recently in a salon in a mega expo center in Guadalajara, the atmosphere in the room shifted from overly air-conditioned, sequestered, educated politeness to being brought there almost involuntarily inside the language, so that we in the room, we felt the being there-ness of the worst injustices, man's inhumanity to man, a place where the species' imagination has no bounds. To the end of proposing a paradise, Zurita lays out everything just as unearthed, the fractured syntax, the ghostly conflation of voices, the interspersion of photographs, letters, brailled text, doctored documents, a sifting of his own identity and a private dissident strain of Catholicism, alongside the sensuousness of the dreamer, the lover, and an ever-shifting ciphering that never stops challenging the regime. The reclamation of a land and its language, this is his charge. In his note to Anti-Paradise, he writes, "I think that the meaning of art, its only purpose, is to make life more humanly livable." Even with my negligible Spanish, Raúl Zurita, I am readily taken up in the company of this spirited, funny, intense, and brilliant poet. He is a veritable crucible of his age. He represents a radically formal break from the Neruda line, but is likewise sealed to the events of his time and place. Prolific, prodigious, passionate, and a perennial innocent. And that is exactly what we crave, what we need from a poet in this time, a poet true to his word. As Henry Miller wrote of Rimbaud, he dreams everything out to the end. Please welcome Raúl Zurita.
Muy buenas noches. Quiero agradecer profundamente la invitación, Lila. Muchas gracias, sí. Muchas gracias, Raúl. Uno lo debería hacer cuando hablan de uno. Después solo queda la decepción. Vamos a leer con la querida Ana Deeny Purgatorio y algunos poemas de otros libros que ella tiene la generosidad y la paciencia de acompañarme. Creo que la simbología decía que lo más difícil era partir. Bueno, ya partí. Va a hacer un pequeño recorrido sobre Purgatorio. Mis amigos creen que estoy muy mala porque quemé mi mejilla.
From Purgatory. My friends, they think I'm a sick woman because I burned my cheek.
Domingo en la mañana. 1. Me amanezco. Se ha roto una columna. Soy una santa, digo.
Sunday morning. 1. I awake. A column has broken. I am a sainted woman, I say.
3. Todo maquillado contra los vidrios, medianamente iluminado, dime que no. El superestrella de Chile. Me toqué en la penumbra. Besé mis piernas. Me he aborrecido tanto estos años.
3. All made up face against the glass. I call myself this enlightened woman. Tell me it's not so, the superstar of Chile. I touched myself in the shadows. I kissed my legs. I've hated myself so much these years.
22. Destrocé mi cara tremenda frente al espejo. Te amo, me dije. Te amo más que nada en el mundo.
22. I smashed my sickening face in the mirror. I love you, I said. I love you more than anything in the world.
38. Sobre los riscos de la ladera, el sol. Entonces abajo en el valle, la tierra cubierta de flores. Zurita, enamorado amigo, recoge el sol de la fotosíntesis. Zurita ya no será nunca más amigo. Desde las 7 p.m. ha empezado a anochecer. La noche es el manicomio de las plantas.
38. Over the cliffs of the hillside, the sun. Then below in the valley, the earth covered with flowers. Zurita, an enamored friend, takes in the sun of photosynthesis. Zurita will now never again be a friend. Since 7 p.m., it has begun to get dark. Night is the insane asylum of the plants. I wiped my weeping eyes.
85. Me han rapado la cabeza. Me han puesto estos harapos de la nariz. Mamá sigue fumando. Yo soy Juana de Arco. Me registran con microfilm.
85. They've shaved my head. They've dressed me in these gray wool rags. Mom keeps on smoking. I am Joan of Arc. They catalog me on microfilm.
Domingo en la mañana, epílogo. Se ha roto una columna. Di adiós. Aunque no lo creas te digo, sí hombre, ayer domingo, con los mismos ojos de este vuelo.
Sunday morning, epilogue. A column has broken. I saw God. Even if you don't believe it, I'm telling you, it's true. Yesterday, Sunday, with the same eyes of this flight.
Desiertos, como un sueño. Claro, este es el desierto de Atacama. Buena cosa. No valía ni 3 chauchas llegar allí. ¿No has visto el desierto de Atacama? Oye, lo viste ya, ¿cierto? Bueno, si no lo has visto, anda de una vez y no me jodas. Lapsus y engaños. Se llama muy propiamente el desierto de Chile.
Deserts, like a dream. Of course. This is the desert of Atacama. Impressive. It didn't cost a dime to get there, and you haven't seen the desert of Atacama. Listen, you saw it out there, didn't you? Well, if you haven't seen it, just go once and for all, and leave me the fuck alone. Lapses and deceits are called my own mind, the desert of Chile.
El desierto de Atacama. ¿Quién podría la enorme dignidad del desierto de Atacama, como un pájaro, se eleva sobre los cielos, apenas empujado por el viento?
The desert of Atacama. Who could the enormous dignity of the desert of Atacama? Like a bird, it elevates itself over the skies, barely pressed by the wind.
El desierto de Atacama 2. Helo allí, suspendido en el aire. El desierto de Atacama, suspendido sobre el cielo de Chile, diluyéndose entre aguas, convirtiendo esta vida y la otra en el mismo desierto de Atacama, áurico, perdiéndose en el aire, hasta que finalmente no haya cielo sino desierto de Atacama, y todos veamos entonces nuestras propias pampas, fosforescentes, carajas, encumbrándose en el horizonte.
The desert of Atacama, too. There it is, there, suspended in the air, the desert of Atacama. suspended over the sky of Chile, dissolving amid auras, converting this life and the other into the same desert of Atacama, luminous, losing itself in the air. Until finally there's not sky but only desert of Atacama, and then all of us will see our own fucked phosphorescent pampa soaring in the horizon.
El desierto de Atacama 3. Los desiertos de Atacama son azules. Los desiertos de Atacama no son azules. Y allá dime lo que quieras. Los desiertos de Atacama no son azules, porque por allá no voló el espíritu de J. Cristo, que era un perdido. Y si los desiertos de Atacama fueran azules, todavía podrían ser el oasis chileno, para que desde todos los rincones de Chile, contentos, viesen flamear por el aire las azules pampas del desierto de Atacama.
The desert of Atacama 3. The deserts of Atacama are blue. The deserts of Atacama are not blue. Go ahead, say what you will. The deserts of Atacama aren't blue because out there Jesus Christ's spirit didn't fly. He was lost. And if the deserts of Atacama were blue, still they could be the Chilean oasis, so that from all corners of Chile gladly you'd see flaming through the air the blue pampas of the desert of Atacama.
El desierto de Atacama 7. 1. Miremos entonces el desierto de Atacama. 2. Miremos nuestra soledad en el desierto, para que desolado frente a estas fachas, el paisaje devenga una cruz extendida sobre Chile, y la soledad de mi facha vea entonces el redimirse de las otras fachas, mi propia redención en el desierto. 3. ¿Quién diría entonces del redimirse de mi facha? 4. ¿Quién hablaría de la soledad del desierto? Para que mi facha comience a tocar tu facha y tu facha a esa otra facha y así, hasta que todo Chile nos hace una sola facha con los brazos abiertos, una larga facha coronada de espinas. Entonces la cruz no será sino el abrirse brazos de mi facha. Nosotros seremos entonces la corona de espinas del desierto. 7. Entonces, clavados facha con facha, como una cruz extendida sobre Chile, habremos visto para siempre el solitario expirar del desierto de Atacama.
The desert of Atacama 7. 1. Let's look then at the desert of Atacama. 2. Let's look at our loneliness in the desert, so that desolate before these forms the landscape becomes a cross extended over Chile, and the loneliness of my form then sees the redemption of the other forms, my own redemption in the desert. 3. Then who would speak of the redemption of my form? 4. Who would tell of the desert's loneliness, so that my form begins to touch your form and your form, that other form, like that, until all of Chile is nothing but one form with open arms, a long form crowned with thorns. 5. Then the cross will be nothing but the opening arms of my form. 6. We will then be the crown of thorns in the desert. 7. Then nailed form to form like a cross extended over Chile, we will have seen forever the final solitary breath of the desert of Atacama.